The first shot hit us before I finished my morning report. I was standing at the command console of the Pale Current, reading supply figures to my second officer Torek, when the entire ship lurched sideways and threw me into the navigation table. The lights flickered. The deck plating groaned beneath my feet, and then the alarm started screaming, that high-pitched wail that every Velinari officer learns to dread because it means only one thing: hostile fire, direct hit, shields failing. I pulled myself up and looked at the main display. My blood, already cold by nature, turned to ice. 19 capital ships hung in the space above Sithari 4. 19. Each one was a Dracon hegemony dreadnought, bristling with weapon arrays, flanked by dozens of smaller escort craft. They had dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, close enough to the planet that their engine signatures were already burning through our sensor grid. No warning, no diplomatic hail, no ultimatum. They just arrived and started firing. I had 12 ships, 12 light cruisers and a cargo hauler that we had bolted spare cannons onto because our fleet budget ran dry 6 cycles ago. That was the entirety of the Velinari 3rd Defense Flotilla, and it was all that stood between those 19 warships and the 1.6 million civilians living on the surface below. My name is Ilian Soth. I am a commander in the Velinari Naval Corps. I am tall, thin-boned, cold-blooded, and I have been trained since childhood to think clearly in moments of crisis. But nothing in my training prepared me for this kind of math. 12 against 19 is not a battle. It is a countdown. The second volley came in before I could give my first order. I watched it on the tactical screen, bright lines of energy streaking across the dark. 2 of my ships, the Dawnspire and the Silver Tide, caught the worst of it. The Dawnspire took a direct hit to her engine section and broke apart. I saw her hull split open, atmosphere venting into the void in a white cloud that froze almost instantly. The Silver Tide lost her forward shields and spun wildly off course, trailing fire and debris. 2 ships gone in the first 30 seconds. I gripped the edge of my console and gave orders. Raise all shields, return fire. Form defensive line between the enemy fleet and the planet. Protect the civilian population at all costs. My voice sounded calm. My hands were shaking. Nobody noticed because everyone was too busy trying to stay alive. Torek appeared beside me, his wide amphibian eyes scanning the tactical readout. He was older than me by 15 cycles, steadier, and he had seen combat before. But even he looked pale, his blue-green skin fading to a chalky gray, the way it does when a Velinari is truly afraid. He said, "Commander, their formation suggests they want the colony intact. They are targeting our ships, not the surface." I understood what that meant. The Dracon hegemony did not conquer worlds to destroy them. They conquered worlds to use them. The farms, the mines, the infrastructure, and most importantly, the people. The hegemony used conquered populations as forced labor. Every man, woman, and child on Sithari 4 was not a target. They were a resource. That knowledge did not comfort me. It made everything worse. I opened a channel to the rest of my flotilla. All ships. This is Commander Soth. Maintain defensive formation. We hold this line, no matter what. Nobody answered with words. They answered by moving into position. 10 remaining ships, battered and outgunned, sliding into a thin line between the hegemony armada and the planet. It was brave. It was also hopeless. The hegemony commander finally hailed us. His face filled my view screen, a Dracon male, heavy-jawed, scaled, with the flat predator eyes of a species that evolved on a high-gravity world where everything either hunted or was hunted. His name, according to the transmission header, was War Commander Kesoth. He spoke in the common trade language, his voice thick and unhurried. "Velinari Flotilla, you are outmatched. Surrender your ships and the colony. Your people will be treated according to hegemony labor protocols. Resist, and we will dismantle your fleet and take the colony regardless. You have 1 hour." I looked at that face on my screen. I thought about labor protocols. I thought about what those words really meant. Chains, cages, families separated, children put to work in hegemony mining operations on worlds where the gravity alone would crush their fragile Velinari bones within a year. I said, "This is Commander Ilian Soth of the Velinari 3rd Defense Flotilla. Sithari 4 is a sovereign Velinari colony, Under the protection of the Galactic Concordance. Your presence here is an act of aggression. Withdraw your fleet immediately. Kessoth stared at me for a long moment. Then he cut the transmission. Torek looked at me. He will not withdraw. No, I said. He will not. Then what do we do? I turned to my communications officer, a young Velinari woman named Essen. She was barely out of the academy, quick-minded, eager, and right now she was gripping her console so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Essen, I said, open a distress channel, maximum range, every frequency, every language, every allied government you can reach. Tell them what is happening here. Tell them we need help. She looked at me. An open distress call? That is against standard protocol. The hegemony will hear it too. Good, I said. Let them hear it. Let them know that someone is watching what they do here today. Essen nodded and went to work. Within minutes, our distress signal was broadcasting into the void. A scream for help, sent in every direction, to anyone who might be listening. I stood at my console and tried to calculate who might hear it and who might respond. The Galactic Concordance was a loose alliance of dozens of species, bound together by treaties and trade agreements, and mutual distrust. On paper, an attack on one member was an attack on all. In reality, the Concordance had not mounted a joint military response to anything in over 40 cycles. Member species looked after themselves. The Olesi Collective was closest. They had ships within range. But the Olesi were pacifists who believed all conflicts could be resolved through dialogue. They would send diplomats, not warships. The Rith Dominion had a powerful military, but they were fighting their own border war on the other side of the sector. They had no forces to spare. The Thanari Union might help, but they were 3 weeks away at best speed. And then there were the humans. I had to be honest with myself. I barely thought about them. Humanity had joined the Galactic Concordance 18 standard cycles ago, a newcomer species from a small blue world in an unremarkable solar system. They were considered a minor power by virtually every other species in the Concordance. They had a small fleet, limited territory, and a reputation for being stubborn, emotional, and strangely aggressive for a species that also insisted on talking about peace all the time. Their nearest military installation was over 40 light-years from Sithari 4. Even if they heard the signal, even if they wanted to help, they could not possibly arrive in time. I pushed humanity out of my mind and focused on what I could control. The hour passed. Kessoth did not wait for the full 60 minutes. At the 40 mark, the hegemony fleet advanced. They came in a standard encirclement pattern, their dreadnoughts spreading wide to surround our thin defensive line from 3 sides. Their escorts pushed ahead, fast and agile, probing our defenses, drawing our fire so the big ships could close distance. I gave the order to engage. My 10 remaining ships opened fire. The pale current shuddered as our weapon arrays discharged. I watched our energy beams strike the lead hegemony escort, overloading its shields and sending it spinning. A small victory. Meaningless against 19 capital ships, but my crew needed to see that we could fight. The hegemony answered with overwhelming force. 3 of my ships took concentrated fire from multiple dreadnoughts at once. The Iron Mist lost her engine section. The Star Warden took a broadside that tore her port hull open from bow to stern. The Clearwater, our converted cargo hauler with her bolted-on cannons, was hit so hard she simply stopped transmitting. One moment she was there on my tactical display. The next moment, she was a cloud of fragments. 7 ships left, 7 against 19. The battle went on for 3 hours. 3 hours of constant fire, constant maneuvering, constant damage reports flooding my console. My crew performed beyond anything I could have asked of them. My helmsman, Drave, flew the pale current through gaps in the enemy formation that should not have existed, buying us seconds of cover behind the wreckage of destroyed escorts. My weapons officer scored hit after hit, disabling 2 hegemony escorts and damaging a dreadnought's shield array. Even Essen, who had never seen combat before today, kept our communications running, through jamming so thick it turned every frequency into static. But we were losing. Slowly, methodically, the hegemony was taking us apart. By the time the firing paused, I was down to 7 ships, all of them damaged, most of them barely functional. The pale current herself had taken 6 direct hits. Our portside hull was breached, and sealed with emergency foam. 3 of our weapon arrays were offline. Our shields were at 19% and dropping. I looked at the tactical display and saw what Kesoth was doing. He was not rushing. He was patient, calculated, professional. He was tightening the noose, pressing us closer to the planet, cutting off our escape routes one by one. He did not need to destroy us quickly. He had time. We did not. I checked the distress channel. Essen had been monitoring for any response since the signal went out. "Anything?" I asked. She shook her head. Her eyes were red. Her hands were still steady on her console, but I could see the effort it took to keep them there. "Nothing, Commander. No response from anyone." I nodded. I had expected this. I had hoped otherwise, but I had expected this. No one was coming. I looked out the viewport at the Hegemony fleet, those dark shapes hanging against the stars, and I understood with perfect clarity that we were going to die here. All of us. My crew, my ships. And then the 1.6 million people below would be taken, chained, and worked until there was nothing left of them. I sat down in my command chair and began composing a final log entry. If nothing else, I wanted the record to show what happened. I wanted someone, someday, to know that we stood here. That was the first day. There were 6 more after it, and each one was worse than the last. The hegemony settled into a siege pattern after that first engagement. Kesoth pulled his dreadnoughts back to a wide orbital perimeter, close enough to keep us trapped, but far enough to make our weakened weapons useless at that range. He deployed sensor drones in a net around the planet, watching everything we did. He mined the 2 closest jump corridors with magnetic disruptors, sealing off any chance of escape or reinforcement through normal faster-than-light lanes. Then he waited. I understood the strategy. He did not need to spend ammunition or risk ships. He just needed to let time do its work. Our shields were draining. Our reactors were running hot. Our medical supplies were disappearing faster than we could ration them. Every hour that passed made us weaker and him stronger. On the second day, I reorganized what was left of my flotilla. 7 ships, all damaged. I split them into 2 groups. 4 would maintain a close defensive orbit around Sithari 4, staying between the population centers and the hegemony fleet. The other 3, including the Pale Current, would rotate patrols along the perimeter, watching for any gap in the enemy blockade, any chance to slip a courier drone through the jamming net. We found no gap. Kesoth was thorough. On the second night, I walked through the lower decks of the Pale Current and saw my crew for what they really were. Not soldiers, not warriors. Most of them were technicians, engineers, and navigators who had signed up for patrol duty along a quiet border. They had expected to spend their service cataloging asteroid fields and escorting trade convoys. Instead, they were trapped in a damaged warship, cut off from everyone they knew, waiting for an enemy that could destroy them whenever it chose to stop being patient. I saw a young sensor operator sitting alone in a corridor, staring at the wall. He could not have been more than 20 cycles old. His name tag read, Vol. When he saw me, he tried to stand up straight and salute. I told him to sit. I sat down next to him. He asked me if anyone was coming to help us. I could have lied. A good commander might have lied. But I looked at this young man, and I could not bring myself to offer him a hope I did not have. And as long as we are here, we are between the enemy and the people below. That matters. He nodded. I do not think it helped, but it was the truth. On the third day, the hegemony tested us. 3 dreadnoughts pushed forward in a probing attack, firing sustained volleys at our defensive line. We returned fire and held position, but we lost the Grey Mist during the exchange. She took 4 direct hits in rapid succession, and her reactor went critical. I watched her on the screen as she flared white and then went dark. Captain Relin and 87 crew, gone. 6 ships left. That evening, Essen intercepted something. A communication drone had somehow slipped through a momentary gap in the hegemony's jamming net. I read it twice because I could not believe what it said the first time. The Olesi acknowledged our situation. They expressed deep concern. They were exploring avenues for peaceful resolution. They urged restraint on all sides. They offered to send a diplomatic envoy to mediate. No ships, no weapons, no timeline for action. Just words, carefully chosen, meaning nothing. Torek read the message over my shoulder and said something in the old Velinari tongue that I will not translate. I deleted the message and told Essen to keep monitoring. On the 4th day, a second drone arrived. This one was from the Rith Dominion. Their message was shorter and more honest. Their military was engaged on their own border. They could not commit forces to a theater this far from their territory. They expressed profound admiration for the Velinari's stand. They would raise the matter at the next Concordance Assembly. Admiration, assembly. Words that would still be ringing in a council chamber, long after the last of us was dead, and the people of Sathari 4 were wearing chains. Nobody said anything. On the 4th night, the planetary governor contacted me. His name was Superintendent Dallin, a civilian administrator who had spent 20 years managing agricultural quotas and water reclamation projects. He was not built for this. None of us were. He told me he had been in contact with the hegemony through a back channel. Kesoth had made an offer, full surrender in exchange for what the Dracon called standard incorporation terms. The colony would become a hegemony territory. The population would be assigned labor roles. Resistance would not be tolerated, but outright cruelty would be minimized. Dallin used the word minimized without any trace of irony. He asked me to consider accepting. I asked him what standard incorporation looked like on the last 3 worlds the hegemony had taken. He went quiet. He knew. The mines, the forced marches, the children separated from parents and sent to training facilities where they were taught to serve their new masters. Minimized cruelty. What a phrase. I told Dallin that I would not surrender. He told me I was condemning everyone. I told him I was trying to save them. We both knew we might both be right. On the 5th day, we lost the Thornfield. A hegemony strike group caught her out of position during a patrol rotation and hit her with concentrated fire before she could rejoin the defensive line. Her captain, a steady officer named Colin, managed to ram one of the hegemony escorts before her ship broke apart. It was the most defiant thing I saw during the entire siege, and it cost us another ship and another 100 lives. 5 ships left. I stopped sleeping. Not by choice. My body simply refused to shut down. I would lie on the hard cot in my quarters and stare at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the pale current's strained reactor, counting the minutes between hegemony sensor sweeps. My mind would not stop running calculations. How long before our power cells died? How long before our food stores ran out? How long before Kesoth decided patience was no longer necessary and simply came in to finish us? On the 6th day, Essen called me to the communications console. She had picked up something unusual. Not a drone this time. A signal fragment, faint and heavily encrypted, bouncing through a chain of deep space relay stations. Her instruments traced the routing pattern back through several nodes, and the origin signature matched Terran military encryption protocols. Human military channels. I stared at the fragment on the screen. It was partial, garbled, too degraded to read in full. It could have been a routine fleet communication that happened to pass through our local relay. It could have been automated. It could have been nothing. Their territory was modest. Their fleet was limited to a handful of warships that most Concordance military analysts described as overbuilt and underpowered. Crude designs that prioritized armor and raw firepower over the elegant shield technology and precision weapons that more advanced species favored. They were a young species, only a few centuries into their spacefaring age, and they had been given a seat at the Concordance table, more out of curiosity than respect. Their nearest base was over 40 light-years away. Even if they had heard us, even if they cared, there was no reasonable scenario in which a human fleet could reach Sathari 4 in time to make any difference. I told Essen to log it and move on. She did. Kesoth was done waiting. His full armada advanced, all 19 remaining capital ships closing in from 3 sides, escorts screening ahead, weapon ports glowing with charged energy. The blockade net tightened around us like a fist. The pale current, her hull patched with emergency foam and held together by the skill of engineers who had not slept in 3 days. The wave crest, with half her weapons offline. The dust veil, whose shields could barely stop debris, let alone focused fire. The night march, running on backup power because her primary reactor had been damaged on day 3. And the frost line, the smallest ship in the flotilla, barely larger than a hegemony escort. 5 ships, wounded, exhausted, running low on everything. I gathered my bridge crew. Torek stood to my right, solid and silent, his face showing nothing. Essen sat at her console, monitoring frequencies that had been empty for days. Drave waited at the helm, his long fingers resting on the control interface. The weapons officer, a quiet veteran named Harath, checked her targeting arrays one last time. I opened a channel to my remaining captains. I did not make a speech. I did not talk about honor or duty or sacrifice. They knew all of that. They had lived it for 7 days. I said, "Form up on me. We go straight at them. Make them remember us." 4 voices responded. Each one said the same word, confirmed. I gave Drave the order to set an intercept course. The pale current surged forward, her damaged engines straining, her scarred hull cutting through the dark toward the hegemony line. My 4 remaining ships fell in behind me, a thin blade pointed at the heart of an armada. I sat in my command chair and waited for the first shot. My hands were not shaking anymore. I had passed beyond fear into something else, something quieter and harder and more final. I was going to die here. I had accepted that. All I wanted now was for it to mean something. The range closed. The hegemony dreadnoughts grew larger on the view screen. Their weapon ports were lit, ready to fire. Kesoth was watching. I could feel it. And then Essen spoke. Her voice was very quiet, almost a whisper, as if she was afraid that speaking too loudly might make it not real. She was staring at her sensor display, and her eyes were wider than I had ever seen them. Where? I asked. Directly behind the hegemony formation. Distance, 12,000 kilometers. Single contact. Mass reading is... She paused. She recalibrated her instruments. She checked again. Commander, the mass reading is off my scale. I looked at the tactical display. There, behind the hegemony fleet, a new signature had appeared. One contact. One ship. And it was enormous. The hegemony had seen it too. I watched their formation react, ships slowing, turning, recalculating. For the first time in 7 days, the Dracan fleet hesitated. Essen's console chimed. An incoming transmission, open channel, broadcast on every frequency. She put it through. A voice filled my bridge. It was calm, steady, and it spoke in flawless Dracan, the language of the enemy, with a pronunciation so precise that it could only have been practiced for this exact moment. This is Captain Grace Whitley, of the Terran Navy vessel Unconquered. You are engaged in hostile action against a civilian population under Concordance protection. You have 60 seconds to begin withdrawal. There will not be a second warning. The bridge went silent. Terran Navy, human, one ship. I turned back to the tactical display. The new contact was resolving now, the sensors painting a clearer picture as the ship fully emerged from void space. What I saw made my breath stop. The ship was a fortress. That was the only word my mind could find. It was easily 3 times the mass of the largest hegemony dreadnought, a mountain of metal and armor plating that hung in space with the quiet authority of something that did not need to announce itself. Its hull was angular, blunt, covered in layered plates that overlapped like the scales of some ancient predator. There were no elegant curves, no aesthetic flourishes. Every surface was functional, every angle was deliberate. This was a machine designed for one purpose, and that purpose was staring down 19 warships without flinching. I had never heard of a Leviathan-class vessel. No concordance registry listed it. No intelligence brief had ever mentioned it. The humans had built this thing in secret, and they had built it to be something the galaxy had never seen before. It took me a moment to recognize it. It was awe. His voice was thick with contempt. 5 damaged ships hung in space behind me, their crews watching the same scene on their own displays. Captain Whitley did not respond with words, not at first. The 60 seconds passed. I counted every one of them. The Unconquered sat motionless, engines at idle, weapon ports sealed. For one terrible minute, I thought perhaps this was just a gesture, a symbolic show of support from a species that had arrived too late and too small to change anything. Then, at exactly 60 seconds, the Unconquered changed. Panels along the entire length of that massive hull began to open. Not a few, not a dozen, hundreds. I watched on magnified display as weapon ports revealed themselves, one after another, unfolding from beneath armored covers like something waking from a very long sleep. Missile batteries in rows of 12. Magnetic rail accelerators, longer than my entire ship. Directed energy arrays that pulsed with a deep blue light, I could see even at this distance. Point defense clusters packed so densely they looked like scales. And other weapons, systems I had no name for, no classification, no frame of reference to understand. Layer after layer. Tier after tier. The ship had not been hiding its weapons, it had been holstering them. Essen's console screamed with energy readings. She looked at me, and her face had gone from shock to something else entirely. Something almost like laughter. "Commander," she said, "the firepower output on that vessel. It is greater than our entire flotilla. It is greater than the Hegemony Armada. I am not sure my instruments can measure the upper range." The Unconquered fired. "I have been in combat for 7 days. I have watched ships burn and break and die. I thought I understood what warships could do. I thought I had seen the full range of what naval weapons were capable of. I was wrong." The first volley struck 7 hegemony capital ships simultaneously, not sequentially, not one after another. All at once, as if the human targeting systems had divided their attention across 7 targets in 7 different positions, and decided that each one needed to stop existing at the same moment. The lead dreadnought took a rail accelerator round through its forward section. The projectile entered through the bow shields, which collapsed on contact as if they were not there, passed through the entire length of the ship, and exited through the stern. The dreadnought folded inward along the path of the round and went dark. A second dreadnought was hit by something I could not identify, a beam of coherent energy so intense that the ship's shields flared once, failed, and the hull beneath them heated to white in less than 2 seconds. The entire forward half of the vessel melted and reformed into a shape that no longer resembled a ship. A third took a missile barrage, not one missile, not 5, dozens, arriving in a pattern so precisely timed that each impact built on the last, peeling away shields and armor in layers until the reactor core was exposed and the ship simply stopped. 7 ships in the first volley. 7 capital ships, each one larger than anything in my flotilla, each one designed to withstand sustained combat against multiple opponents, ended in a single coordinated strike. The hegemony formation came apart. I do not use that phrase as a figure of speech. It came apart the way a structure comes apart when you remove the supports. Ships that had been advancing in lockstep suddenly veered in different directions. Escorts scattered. The remaining 12 dreadnoughts tried to regroup, but the Unconquered was already moving, and it moved with a speed that a ship of that size should not have possessed. I watched it on the tactical display, this enormous vessel cutting through the gap it had just created in the hegemony line, repositioning with a precision that spoke of either extraordinary engine technology or a crew that was willing to endure punishing forces of acceleration. I would later learn it was both. Kessoth rallied his fleet. I will give the Drakon that much credit. He was a professional, and his initial shock lasted only moments before he began issuing orders, pulling his remaining ships into a concentrated formation, focusing fire on the Unconquered from multiple angles. The concentrated fire of 12 dreadnoughts hit the human battleship. I saw the impacts on the display, bright flashes across the Unconquered's massive hull, energy beams and missile strikes raining down on it from 3 sides. The Unconquered took the hits, and kept moving. I stared at the display. The ship's armor was not like anything I had studied. It did not rely on energy shields the way Velinari or Drakon technology did. Instead, the hull itself was the defense, layers upon layers of dense composite plating that absorbed, deflected, and distributed impact energy across the entire structure. When a section was damaged, it broke away cleanly, revealing undamaged armor beneath. The ship was designed to be wounded. It was designed to lose pieces of itself and keep fighting. This ship had been built by a species that expected to get hurt and planned to keep going. Captain Whitley did not panic. She did not charge blindly. Through the open tactical channel, I heard fragments of her orders to her crew, calm and measured, each one precise. She was herding the hegemony fleet, I realized, not chasing them, not engaging randomly. She was driving specific ships into specific positions, using their own formation against them. She isolated a cluster of 3 dreadnoughts by positioning the Unconquered between them and the rest of their fleet. Then she hit them in rapid succession, 3 volleys in 12 seconds, each one a finishing strike. 3 more ships silenced before they could rejoin the main group. The remaining 9 dreadnoughts tried a different approach. They linked their shield systems together, a tactic I had seen work before, where multiple ships overlapped their defensive barriers to create a combined shield stronger than any individual vessel could produce. It was a sound strategy against conventional weapons. Whitley broke it in 4 minutes. She switched to a weapons system I had never seen, some kind of resonance-based technology that targeted the frequency harmonics of linked shield arrays. Instead of hitting the shields, it made them vibrate, turning their own energy against the ships they protected. The linked shields did not just fail, they amplified the damage, feeding it back into every vessel in the network. 2 of the linked dreadnoughts suffered catastrophic shield overloads and went dark. The hegemony abandoned shield linking immediately. She had forced them to unlearn their own doctrine in the middle of a fight. I sat in my command chair and watched a single human warship dismantle an armada that had held us captive for 7 days. I watched it take hit after hit, losing armor plates, venting atmosphere from breaches in the outer hull, losing a secondary weapon array to concentrated fire, and I watched it keep fighting, without slowing, without retreating, without hesitation. There is a moment in every battle where the outcome becomes clear. Not when the last shot is fired, but when one side realizes that the other will not stop. I saw that moment in the hegemony fleet. I saw it in the way their movements changed, the way their formation shifted from aggressive to defensive to something that looked very much like desperation. These were Draken, a species that worshipped strength, that built their entire civilization on the principle that the strong take and the weak serve. They had come here expecting to be the strongest thing in the sky. They had expected soft targets and easy conquest. They had not expected this. And then something happened that changed my understanding of humans more than the weapons, more than the armor, more than any display of military power. During a brief lull in the firing, while the hegemony fleet regrouped for what would be their last attempt at a counterattack, my communications officer intercepted a short-range transmission from the Unconquered. It was not from Captain Whitley. It was not a tactical communication. It was from a damage control officer on the lower decks of the human ship, a lieutenant named Peter Holt. The transmission was directed at my ship, at the Pale Current. Lieutenant Holt was requesting our medical supply specifications. He wanted to know what drugs were compatible with Velinari physiology, what blood type our species used, what environmental conditions our wounded required. He was in the middle of a battle. His ship was engaged with 9 enemy capital ships. There were fires burning on his own decks, and hull breaches his teams were racing to seal. And he was taking the time to prepare medical supplies for my wounded. They were already planning to help us, before the battle was even over. I sat there with that transmission on my screen, and something shifted inside me, not my opinion of humans, my entire framework for understanding what they were. The concordance called them a minor power. The intelligence briefs described them as emotional, sentimental, and strategically insignificant. Every briefing I had ever read treated humanity as a curiosity, a young species that had stumbled into the galactic community and would eventually settle into a quiet, unremarkable role. I looked at the Unconquered on my display, scarred and burning and relentless, and I understood that everything I had been told was wrong, not inaccurate, wrong in a way that went deeper than bad data. The galaxy had looked at humans and seen what it wanted to see: small territory, small fleet, short lifespans, and it had concluded that these things made them small. It had not occurred to anyone that a species might choose to be quiet and still be vast, that a species might build ships in secret, not because they wanted to conquer, but because they were waiting, watching, preparing for the moment when someone needed them. The hegemony's final counterattack lasted 20 minutes. Kessoth gathered his remaining 7 dreadnoughts into a tight spearhead formation and drove directly at the Unconquered, concentrating every weapon they had on a single point of the human ship's hull. Whitley let them come. She held position, absorbing their fire, her layered armor shedding plates like skin, and when they were close, committed, unable to pull away, she fired everything she had. The spearhead shattered. 3 more dreadnoughts were silenced in a single sustained barrage. A 4th lost its engines and began drifting, powerless. The remaining 3, including Kessoth's command ship, broke away and ran. They turned and ran for the mined jump corridor, the same corridor Kessoth had sealed to trap us. His own mines destroyed one of his escorts as his fleet fled through the passage. He did not slow down. He did not look back. Captain Whitley let them go. I thought about that choice for a long time afterward. She could have pursued. She could have destroyed every last hegemony ship in the system. She had the firepower. She had the speed. Nothing they had could stop her. She chose not to. She let the survivors escape, and I later understood why. A destroyed fleet is a tragedy. A surviving fleet is a story. Those ships would return to hegemony space and tell every commander, every officer, every soldier what they had seen. They would describe what happened when they attacked a colony under human protection. They would carry that story through every command structure, every war room, every strategic briefing in the hegemony. Fear, humans understood, is a weapon that does not require ammunition. You just have to give it a reason to exist, and then let it spread on its own. The last hegemony ship disappeared into the jump corridor. The sensor net cleared. The mines went silent. And for the first time in 7 days, no one was firing at us. I sat in my command chair and listened to silence, not true silence. The pale current groaned and hummed around me, her damaged systems straining, her hull creaking under the stress of 7 days of combat. But the weapons were quiet. The alarms had stopped. The threat indicators on my tactical display were, for the first time since that first morning, empty. Torek was standing beside me. His hands were flat on the console. He was trembling, very slightly, in a way that only someone who knew him well would notice. Essen was at her station, and she was laughing, quiet, breathless laughter that she could not seem to stop. Drave had both hands on the helm and his head bowed, and I think he might have been praying. I looked down at my own hands. I had been gripping the armrests of my command chair so tightly that I had cracked the casing. I had not even noticed. I took a breath, then another. Then I opened a channel to the Unconquered. My voice did not work on the first try. I cleared my throat and tried again. Unconquered. This is Commander Ilian Soth of the Velinari vessel. Pale Current. I paused. I did not know what to say. What do you say to someone who just saved everything you have? The view screen flickered and resolved into an image. Captain Grace Whitley. She was smaller than I expected. Humans are shorter than Velinari, but even by human standards, she was not a tall person. Dark skin, close-cropped gray hair, lines around her eyes that suggested years of squinting at readouts and star charts. Behind her, the bridge of the Unconquered was a controlled disaster. Sparking consoles, a medic treating an officer who was bleeding from a cut above his eye, crew members, moving with the focused, exhausted efficiency of people who had just done something extraordinary and were already thinking about what needed to be fixed next. She looked at me through the screen with steady, calm eyes. Eyes that looked like they had seen this kind of day before. She said, "Commander Soth, sorry we are late. What do you need?" I stared at her. Sorry we are late. As if she had been delayed at a routine appointment. As if crossing 40 light-years in 7 days and fighting 19 capital ships alone was something mildly inconvenient that she wished had gone more smoothly. I found my voice. "Captain Whitley, how did you get here? Your nearest installation is over 40 light-years away. You could not have made that transit in 7 days. It is not possible." She almost smiled. "We have been making some improvements to our drive systems, and we had a reason to hurry." "Why?" I asked. "Why did you come?" The Concordance did not request assistance. The Velinari are not a major ally to Earth. There was no strategic reason for you to be here. Whitley looked at me, and for a moment, her expression shifted. Not to confusion, to something that looked almost like disbelief, as if my question did not make sense to her. She said, "We picked up a distress call. Civilians were going to die. That is the whole calculation." I sat with those words. I turned them over in my mind. I tested them for hidden meaning, for diplomatic maneuvering, for the kind of strategic subtext that every Concordance interaction was laced with. I found none. She meant exactly what she said. The whole calculation. Not politics, not alliances, not territorial interest. Someone was in trouble. That was enough. I said, "You sent one ship." The almost smile became an actual smile, small and brief, but real. One was enough, and it sends a message. She was right about both things. Within the hour, the Unconquered deployed shuttles, not combat craft. Search and rescue vehicles, crewed by humans in heavy protective suits, equipped with cutting tools and medical supplies. They fanned out through the debris field where my lost ships had been destroyed, methodically searching the wreckage for survivors. They found 17 Velinari alive in the remains of the Dawnspire. The Dawnspire, the first ship I had watched die, the one that broke apart in the opening volley on that first terrible morning. 17 people, sealed in airtight compartments, surviving on emergency atmosphere recyclers, waiting for rescue that they had no reason to believe was coming. The humans found them. The humans pulled them out of the wreckage, transferred them to medical shuttles, and brought them aboard the Unconquered for treatment. 17 people I had already mourned. 17 people I had already added to my list of the lost. I had to sit down when Essen told me. I had to close my eyes and breathe for a very long time. Medical teams from the Unconquered came aboard my surviving ships. I met Dr. Lucy Marsh, the Unconquered's chief medical officer, when she boarded the Pale Current with a team of 4. She was a small woman, younger than I expected, with brown hair pulled back from her face and hands that moved with absolute precision as she triaged my wounded. She knew Velinari biology, not approximately, not in the broad strokes that a general practitioner might learn from a database. She knew it in detail. She knew our blood chemistry, our nerve structure, our sensitivity to certain anesthetic compounds. When I asked her how, she said that the Terran Navy required all deployed medical officers to earn certification in the physiology of every known concordant species. Every species. Just in case. Just in case they ever needed to save someone they had never met. I watched this small human woman move through my medical bay, treating my wounded with a calm focus that made my own medics look uncertain. She did not hesitate. She did not consult her instruments for the basics. She had learned how our bodies worked because she had decided, or her Navy had decided, that it was not acceptable to encounter a wounded ally and not know how to help. Captain Whitley came aboard the Pale Current later that day. She walked through my damaged corridors with her hands behind her back and her eyes moving constantly, taking in the patched hull breaches, the scorched bulkheads, the makeshift repairs my engineers had performed under fire. She moved like someone who had seen worse and fixed it. She moved like someone who understood exactly what 7 days of siege looked like from the inside. She shook my hand when we met in person, a human gesture, the pressing together of bare hands. I found it startlingly intimate. Velinari do not touch casually. But I took her hand, and her grip was firm and warm and brief, and she looked up at me, because I am tall and she is not, and she said, "Your defense of this colony was one of the bravest things I have ever seen." I did not know how to respond. I said, "We did what we could. It was not enough." "It was enough to keep them alive until we got here," she said. 7 days. That was enough. We sat together in my briefing room, which was half destroyed and smelled of burned wiring, and I asked her the questions I could not stop thinking about. I asked her how the Terran Navy had built a ship like the Unconquered, without anyone in the Concordance knowing about it. She told me that humanity had been quietly expanding its naval capabilities for over a decade. They had designed and constructed an entire class of warships that did not appear in any Concordance registry. They had tested faster-than-light drive systems that the galactic scientific community had declared theoretical and impractical. They had established forward deployment positions in deep space, hidden supply caches, and sensor networks scattered through uninhabited systems, allowing them to respond to crises across a far wider range than anyone realized. Not to conquer, she said, not to expand, to respond. I asked her why. Why build in secret? Why not announce their capabilities and claim the status they clearly deserved? She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "We watched what happens in this galaxy to species that cannot defend themselves. We watched the Concordance issue statements while colonies burned. We watched species get swallowed by the hegemony, while their neighbors debated the political implications. And we decided that was not going to happen if we could help it. Not on our watch." I asked her about the technology. The weapons I did not recognize, the resonance-based system that had broken the hegemony's linked shields, the speed of her ship, the armor that fought like a living thing. She told me that humans had a phrase, "Necessity is the mother of invention." She told me that humanity was a young species, and they knew it. They did not have the centuries of technological development that older species enjoyed, so they built differently. They built with the assumption that everything would go wrong, that they would be outmatched, that they would take damage, and they designed every system to keep functioning under conditions that should have been impossible. Their ships were not elegant. They were not refined. They were built to endure. Like the species that built them, she said. And then she changed the subject. Because humans, I was learning, did not dwell on their own virtues. They just lived them. I walked alone to the observation deck of the Pale Current after Whitley returned to her ship. I stood in the damaged, half-dark compartment and looked out through the cracked viewport at the Unconquered hanging in orbit above Sithari 4. The ship was a ruin, a beautiful, terrifying ruin. Its hull was scorched black in places, pitted and dented where hegemony fire had hammered it for 2 hours. Armor plates hung loose or were missing entirely, showing the undamaged layers beneath. Atmosphere leaked from a dozen small breaches, thin white plumes that froze in the sunlight. One engine pod trailed a faint wisp of smoke. And already, human repair crews were outside, crawling across the hull in their heavy suits, welding and patching and replacing. I could see the blue-white sparks of their tools as they worked, methodical and unhurried, fixing a ship that had just fought 19 capital vessels so that it would be ready to fight again if it needed to. They would have the Unconquered operational again before my own engineers finished the most basic repairs on the Pale Current. I stood there, and I thought about everything the galaxy had told me about humans. Minor power. That was the label. A small fleet of crude warships from a young civilization that had joined the Concordance barely 18 cycles ago. Short-lived, emotionally volatile, strategically insignificant. A curiosity at best. A footnote in the galactic order. I thought about a species that builds warships like fortresses because they expect to be hurt and plan to keep fighting anyway. I thought about a species that trains every single one of its deployed doctors in the medicine of a dozen alien races, just in case they might someday need to save a stranger. I thought about a species that hides its true strength, not out of weakness, but out of patience, watching and waiting and building in silence until the moment someone screams for help. I thought about a crew that prepared medical supplies for my wounded while they were still being fired upon. I thought about a captain who crossed 40 light years in 7 days because a species she had barely met was in danger, and when asked why she came, she said 6 words that contained more truth than every diplomatic communique the Concordance had ever issued. Civilians were going to die, that is the whole calculation. I thought about Grace Whitley, 5 feet tall, gray-haired, calm as a stone, who looked at 19 dreadnoughts and said, "You have 60 seconds." And I understood. The galaxy did not misunderstand humans. They underestimated them. There is a difference. Misunderstanding is ignorance, and ignorance can be corrected with information. Underestimation is a choice. It is the decision to look at something and see only what you expect to see. Every species in the Concordance looked at humanity and saw a small territory, a small fleet, short lifespans, and loud emotions. And every one of them decided that these things defined what humans were. They never considered the possibility that humans were simply choosing to be quiet, that a species could be vast without being loud, that strength does not require announcement, that the most powerful thing in the galaxy might not be the biggest fleet, or the most advanced technology, or the oldest civilization. It might just be someone who shows up. In the days that followed, the galaxy began to recalculate. The hegemony withdrew from 2 other contested systems within 72 hours. Not because humans were present in those systems, because they were suddenly unsure where else humans might be, and what else they might have built. The equation had changed. Every hegemony commander now had to factor in the possibility that any target, any colony, any system they attacked, might be within range of a human warship they did not know existed. The cost of aggression had become unpredictable, and unpredictable costs are the one thing empires cannot tolerate. The Concordance responded with politics. They demanded to know how the Terran Navy had constructed a Leviathan-class battleship without Concordance oversight. They cited regulations on undeclared military construction. They expressed concern about transparency and trust. Captain Whitley responded to these concerns through official channels. I later obtained a copy of her statement. It was 3 sentences long. The Unconquered was built to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We did not ask permission because permission was not required. We ask only that the Concordance consider why a ship like this was necessary in the first place. The Olesi Collective issued a formal commendation of the Terran Navy's actions at Sithari 4. The same Olesi who had offered us diplomats instead of ships now praised the humans for doing what the Concordance could not. I found this darkly amusing. The Rith Dominion, the military power that had told us they could not spare forces, quietly opened a military dialogue with Earth for the first time. The Rith understood strength. They had just seen it demonstrated in a way that could not be ignored. And across the galaxy, in species large and small, advanced and developing, military and peaceful, the conversation changed. Not because of treaties or resolutions or diplomatic summits, because of a single ship and a single captain, and 16 words that rewrote the rules. We picked up a distress call. Civilians were going to die. That is the whole calculation. On the last day before the Unconquered departed Sithari 4, Captain Whitley visited me one final time aboard the Pale Current. She brought a bottle of something, a clear amber liquid that she called whiskey. She said it was a human tradition to share a drink after a battle. I told her that Velinari do not typically consume alcohol. She said she also brought water. We sat in my repaired briefing room and talked. Not about strategy or politics, about smaller things. She told me about her family on Earth, a daughter who was studying marine biology, a garden she kept in the small patch of artificial soil outside her quarters on the Unconquered. She told me she missed rain. I told her I missed the salt marshes of my home world, the shallow, warm tides where I grew up learning to swim before I learned to walk. We talked like two people, not two officers, and I realized that this, more than the weapons or the armor or the impossible drive technology, was what made humans different. They fought like something ancient and unstoppable, but when the fighting was done, they wanted to sit with you and ask about your home. Before she left, she shook my hand again. She said, "Commander Soth, if you ever need us again, send the signal. We will come." I believed her. There was no doubt in my mind that she meant every word. I watched the Unconquered depart through the viewport of the pale current. The great ship turned slowly, its scarred hull catching the light of the local star, and then it accelerated, faster and faster, until it reached the speed where void space opens and the stars stretch into lines. The tier appeared, that wound in the fabric of real space, and the Unconquered slid through it and was gone. The void was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not empty, full of possibility and warning and promise. I returned to my bridge and sat in my command chair. I opened my log and began a new entry. Not a battle report, not a damage assessment, a message. I addressed it to every species in the Galactic Concordance, to every empire watching from the shadows, to every power that had dismissed humanity as small and quiet and unimportant. I wrote what I had seen, I wrote what I had learned, and I ended with this. They are not small. They were quiet. There is a difference that the galaxy must now understand. They built in silence, not because they were weak, but because they were waiting for the moment when someone, somewhere, needed them. And when that moment came, they did not send diplomats. They did not send statements of concern. They sent a ship that could fight an armada alone, crewed by people who trained to save strangers, commanded by a woman who crossed the galaxy because she heard a cry for help and decided that was reason enough. The void is not empty anymore. It has a name now, and the name belongs to a species that the rest of us overlooked for 18 cycles because we were too busy measuring their fleet size and their territory and their lifespan to notice what actually mattered. They show up when nobody else will, when the odds are impossible, when the math says there is no hope. They show up, and they fight. Not for territory, not for power, not for the kind of strategic advantage that every other species in this galaxy calculates before committing a single ship. They fight because someone is hurting. That is enough for them. That is the whole calculation. Remember that. Because the next time a distress call goes out into the dark, you may choose not to answer. But they will. And when they arrive, you will want to have been on the right side. The void knows their name now. And so do I.